The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us to this webinar, Engaging Men and Boys in Healthy Masculinity. My name is Maria Mendez. I'm the new Training and Technical Assistance Manager here at CICASA. I'm so excited to be here with you all. Glad to have our presenter today as well. Just a few housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute for now for the presentation. If you have any questions, you can type those into the chat box down in your bottom right there, and we'll be keeping an eye out for those questions, and any questions that are content-based, we will give those over to Tyler to answer during the presentation. If you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to also put that in the chat, and we will try to troubleshoot that here on our end, on the CICASA end. PowerPoint handout will be sent to you all by email after the webinar, and there will be a survey at the end. If you all would do that for us, your feedback is greatly appreciated. It helps us figure out what topics and how we're doing on our end as well. So first off, we do want to do a quick poll to see who's on the line. So if you can tell us who you are. Can you all see that? Perfect. So we'll give you all a little bit to answer for us. So it looks like we have coming in kind of between advocates and prevention education providers. There are others. Please do specify that in the chat box as you're seeing that. As you're clicking other, if you could let us know who you are. That way we, as well as our presenter, has an idea as far as who's on the call. So again, we have a lot of other folks, 32% it looks like right now. Please continue to do that. 35% prevention education providers we're getting right now. Great turnout. Thank you all for being here with us. And again, don't forget, if you're typing other, please type in where it is that you're coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and let you all see who is on the call. So it looks like we have about 26% advocates, 39% prevention education providers, which makes a lot of sense. We have 9% criminal justice system employees, and we have 26% others. Again, please, if you can, please do type in the chat box where you are coming to us from. So again, thank you all for coming and joining us today on this webinar. We are very excited about our presenter today who will be doing the webinar. Again, Engaging Men and Boys in Healthy Masculinity. Our presenter is Tyler Osterhaus. I think I said that right. Tyler, please correct me if I'm wrong. Artist, advocate, and anti-violence educator who's speaking to us from Cornerstone Advocacy Services. So at this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Tyler. Give me 1 second. There we go. Tyler, are you there?
I am. It looks like I'm sharing my webcam, and hopefully my screen is still broadcasting. I can't tell if that's working right now. All I can see is the quick poll. So
there we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I see it. Yep, looking good. Okay, well, great. And let me I need to pull up my chat in here, my questions. Good. So I feel like I am good to go. Okay. Well. Hello, everyone out there in internet land, and specifically Colorado. So I am Tyler Osterhaus, and I am broadcasting today live from Cornerstone Advocacy Services in wonderful Bloomington, Minnesota. So we are a suburb just south of Minneapolis, right by the airport and the infamous Mall of America. Today, I also have my incredible staff with me here. I'm speaking on behalf of Cornerstone School-Based Services in some regards today. So I've got Lori Nordahl, Liz Maloney, and Andrew Dettel, and all great individuals. You'll get a chance to meet them in a few. Just a little bit about me and my history. I actually was a Coloradan for about 10 years, not a native Coloradan, but lived out there from about 2005 to 2012. So I don't know if that's 10 years. Math is not my forte, but I was heavily involved in the Be There for Your Kids, the Colorado Dads initiative. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, back in about 2007, Colorado received one of the largest federal grants ever to promote responsible fatherhood, and that was administered by Colorado Department of Human Services. And so they, over 5 years, they provided sub-grants across the state of Colorado. A lot of those were small community agencies, faith-based organizations, but a lot were also government programs such as like a child support, child welfare program. I was actually at the time working for Weld County Department of Social Services at the time, so child welfare in Greeley. So with Be There for Your Kids or Colorado Dads, one of the things that we were tasked with as sort of the leadership council was to create ties with local domestic violence agencies. And it was sort of this idea that had come down from the feds that said, hey, we want to engage men in specific parenting programs that specifically targeted men, but we also wanted to make sure that these were guys who were sort of deemed safe to be in our program, because as you can imagine, a big part of the program was, hey, spend more time with your kids, spend more time with your partner. And certainly we didn't want to sort of promote that message if those dads were not safe men to be in the home. So each local program had to partner with a domestic violence agency and come up with some screening tools and some protocols and procedures and stuff like that. But this was really exciting. We had an amazing team out there at the time, and sort of the light bulb went on, and we realized that we should be doing more, right? Fatherhood was the perfect venue to engage men in conversations about violence prevention. And while the initiative here, Colorado Men Against Domestic Violence, really did focus more on domestic violence and dating abuse, we certainly addressed other forms of violence like sexual assault, sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. But this was really sort of my initiation into sort of this gendered work, specifically DV and SA prevention. And for a time was also able to facilitate one of the Caring Dads programs. And so if anybody, I assume this is still the case, but back then there was a lot of work being done to actually create a fatherhood program that the courts would recognize as a valid referral for men who had either had a DV charge or a child abuse finding. And so it was explicitly working with dads who had some greater challenges around already demonstrating some abusive behavior. But for the most part, we worked with dads of all shapes and sizes, right? Teen dads, older dads. A lot of programs were specifically targeted to fathers of specific demographics. It was truly one of the most amazing adventures I've ever been involved with, because I am also a dad myself. So I'm father to Luna, who is now in 8th grade here in Minnesota, and just an amazing kid. So really just excited that I was able to come into this through the venue of fatherhood. Then in about 2012, my family moved out to San Diego. My wife got a job after graduating grad school there at CSU, and I found myself working for the Navy, which was kind of interesting. As someone who is a violence prevention educator, I certainly felt kind of out of my element on a military base, and as a self-identified old punk rocker, it was definitely kind of not my scene, but again, fell in love with the people and the folks out there. About this time, if you remember, sexual assault both on campus and sexual assault within the military were really hot topics in the media. And so I was actually, for the time that I was out there, coordinated the domestic violence program on Naval Base San Diego, but then also became a sexual assault victim advocate, and was able to introduce this idea of working explicitly with men in this program, S4SI, so Sailors for Sexual Integrity. At the time, there wasn't a lot of prevention programming, at least at Naval Base San Diego, geared explicitly towards men. It was just very sort of general, like, hey, sexual assault is wrong, please don't do it. And I really made the case that we need to be talking to men explicitly about men's issues and men's role in either perpetrating violence or certainly in helping to end violence and support victims and everything that goes along with that. So I would like to just admit, Sailors for Sexual Integrity is probably about the worst title of any prevention program you can ever have. I still giggle this idea. We wanted to name it Sex U, like Sex University, like everything you need to know about like healthy sexuality. We were not given the go-ahead to do that, so had to sort of settle for Sailors for Sexual Integrity. I like to giggle and make jokes that, you know, maybe two folks have gone on a date and things are maybe leading up to some sexual activity. Of course, they're going to ask for consent, but somebody casually slips into the conversation, you know, are you someone with sexual integrity? I find that, I don't know why, that just makes me giggle. So after my stint there, I ended up back in Colorado and had the amazing opportunity to work with Tommy Keel. Shout out to Tommy if you're there, if you know Tommy. One of my best buds, but was able to work with Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's Sexual Violence Prevention Program. I was doing some webinars with them, and actually this is one I'm particularly proud of, this Confessions of Monsters. Tommy recognized my creative brilliance and was able to sort of massage it in a very good direction here. And we got to do some really fun creative things in looking at gender-based violence through the lens of horror films. And the reason why I share that is this is sort of my take, is I in my professional role, I am an advocate, I am a prevention educator, but I also like to think of myself first and foremost as an artist, that bringing creativity and fun and some artistry to this work. So I did want to just share a little bit about my background and just share that I have some ties to the work being done there in Colorado. So now I find myself here in Minnesota. I work for an amazing agency, Cornerstone. Cornerstone started as a domestic violence agency back in the early 80s, and has since taken on, is a dual service agency, also serving survivors of sexual assault, sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. And right now I find myself today with my team here as the coordinator of school-based services program. And what I love about this program has been running, we are now in our 25th year. Obviously, I haven't been here the whole time, but being able to sort of tap into the legacy of a really strong youth prevention program has been an amazing opportunity. What I love about our program is that sometimes we see folks have maybe an advocacy program and then and that's sort of standalone, and then maybe they have an education program, a prevention ed program, that's standalone. Ours is explicitly integrated, and I found that the two just inform each other very, very well as we're meeting with young folks one-on-one, talking about all of these issues, violence prevention in the schools, supporting victims of the violence. We're using those narratives, we're using those issues that come up. It's very youth informed, and we're threading that back into our prevention education presentations. And we're also using our presentation education, the classroom experience, to actually market our advocacy services, right? So here's a list of, our curriculum is called the No Abuse curriculum. It's developed in-house. We currently talk to young people about anger, bullying and harassment, social media, and your relationships, which is basically a revamped version of social or cyberbullying. Of course, teen dating abuse. We talk about gender stereotypes and how they can impact perpetration of violence, LGBTQIA issues, sexting, sex culture and consent, which is really our sexual assault prevention program, sexual harassment. We do in a number of schools actually talk about health effects of pornography, believe it or not. and also sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. And then we also, this last year, have created a new sort of offshoot. It's our Positive Masculinity Project. Andrew, who you'll meet in a little bit, has taken the lead on facilitating some boys groups in the schools to talk explicitly about addressing issues of toxic masculinity and promoting healthy masculinity. And at my level, I'm working with our executive director, Meg Schnabel. So hello, Meg, if you are out there. We are in the process of creating a men's council. And so this is an opportunity to engage adult men from the community to come to the table and provide proactive solutions to preventing and responding to violence within with basically the greater Minneapolis area, Hennepin County, where we are located. So that is me in a nutshell. Here is our amazing team picture. This is the crew here. So this is school-based services. Liz Maloney, who is center there, had this amazing idea. She had a Groupon for a JC Penney portrait, and as a team building activity this summer, we went out and we posed for this team photo. And really, Liz had this idea that she wanted a theme, right? And so we were going to sort of channel our inner like goth kid or inner 50s sort of greaser rebel. It wasn't hard for me because as I tell these guys, that kind of was my life growing up as a young punk rocker in the late 80s, early 90s. And I would just like to say in this photo, I am wearing my Warlock Pinchers shirt, which is a classic Denver punk band. Go Denver punk rock. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. Oh, last but not least, I also do some technical assistance. I have a consulting sort of side business called Transformative Learning Solutions. I've given presentations at the National Sexual Assault Conference, have done some technical assistance with universities and with military. And as you see, I like to bring a lot of performance and a lot of media into the work that I do. So today we are, yep.
Sorry, we do have a question that has come in the chat box about the health effects of pornography that you talked about. Carl asks, is it research-based and is it accessible?
Yeah, so our whole curriculum, Cornerstone has had a just sort of a history of once we feel like the curriculum is at a place where we feel comfortable sharing, we share that to anyone who's interested, free of charge. We actually just revamped our whole curriculum this summer. Lori, who you're going to meet here in a little bit, has really taken the lead on that, and her and I are actually, now that we are back to school, we are going to hammer out the facilitator's guide, but all of our information, contact info, we share at the end, and if you're interested, please reach out to us. So I will say, is it research-based, right? It's researched as much as that we're citing sources. We really frame it up through a public health lens, but it's also, I feel like, very youth-informed. And so we first talk about pornography as a piece of media, right? So we talk about the stories that are representative in pornography, but when we talk about the health effects, that is the research-based bit that does talk about how it impacts addiction and brain development and just intimacy and trust within relationships. We also talk a little bit about, of course, obviously you have to write about that not everyone who is a participant in the movies that you might view online has given full consent or is a willing participant, about links to exploitation or trafficking. One thing that I absolutely love about how we facilitate this is we use a piece of software called Poll Everywhere, which integrates in with like the PowerPoint slide, and the students are able to take out their school iPads, or the teachers give them permission to use their cell phones, and then we poll them live, very much like we just did here at the beginning of this webinar. But we ask questions, and students are able to answer those questions anonymously. And so we feel that we're able to facilitate a discussion in the classroom based on real information that people, if we raised our hand and we said, hey, has anybody ever sent a naked picture before? Has anybody shared a naked picture without someone's consent? You can imagine most people aren't going to raise their hand and incriminate themselves. But we do feel that if people are given sort of that cloak of anonymity, they want to answer pretty truthfully. So we also talk about sexting, right, and sort of revenge porn and links to pornography in that capacity. we've been able to identify, so we've been teaching that class for about 2 years now, and through just the data that we've gleaned through that software, we've identified that about across the board in any school that we go to, some higher or lower, but on average about 40% of high school students have identified that they have been pressured to send a naked picture. And so what we love about that is when we're working with kids one-on-one and they're talking about the real life problems. And I sometimes say that as advocates, we hear the worst of the worst, right? The kids share their most intimate secrets and tell stories about kind of the seedy underbelly of what might be happening within the halls of the school. And we're able to take that data then and then go to the school staff and say, look, like you might not acknowledge that this is a problem, right? Or it might not be on your radar because obviously the kids aren't sort of like being forthright with that. But from data that we collected in your health classes, would sort of prove otherwise. So then we're able to leverage that to maybe deepen the work, right? And create more opportunities for advocacy and education. So I don't know, does that answer the question?
Yes,
Okay.
it does. Thanks, Tyler.
All right. Yeah, excellent. So moving on, I really like to frame up this work through two sort of like very sound educational theories. And the first is this idea of transformative learning, right? So as prevention educators, like all, I sometimes say all, right? But that's a lot. All we can really do is hope that we're turning on those light bulbs, right? That we come in, oftentimes, maybe we have an hour if we're lucky, right? Maybe we'll be invited back to do an 8-week course, but let's face it, the reality is oftentimes we get one opportunity to interface with folks and have that conversation about preventing violence. And in that short amount of time, we have to create some sort of shift in their understanding. And so there's some really sound theory out there from an educational perspective that says that when we're able to frame up our learning through this transformative lens, we can help people create new frames of reference and new dominant narratives. So there was this dude Mesereau who kind of came up with this theory, but at the time he said often transformation is, he called it a disorienting dilemma. Really in my mind, that's code for trauma, right? Like something bad happens in your life, something unexpected, something that sort of takes your life in a new direction. And sometimes it can literally be mind-blowing, right? It forces us to think about who we are, what our relationships with others are, what our place in the world is. And that is sort of a key opportunity to provide opportunity to replace some of those harmful dominant narratives in a healthier sort of framework. Also then pairing transformative learning with this idea of narrative learning. And narrative learning is simply learning through storytelling. It's kind of funny, like our whole team, we just the 4 of us did a personality test, and we all discovered that we all shared the same personality, ENFP. So we are kind of like extreme extroverts, love to tell stories, love to have conversations with folks, but to me, learning really takes place through storytelling, right? I mean, I think it's one of the oldest venues before reading, before writing, right? People shared imparted knowledge through stories. This is built into our myths. This is built into almost every major religion, uses stories to impart values. So it's about hearing stories, it's about telling stories, and I think more importantly right now, recognizing stories, right? Because when media stories sort of like come across our stream of consciousness, being able to tap into those stories and sort of decipher them, right, and address like issues of rape culture sort of in real time. What I love about storytelling is, right, it gives us this opportunity to create empathy, right? We can see through that story, we can see how other people react, how other people feel, how other people are impacted by situations, and it allows us to think a little more critically about issues. Why this is important is because stories quite literally construct our culture. So I'm going to turn to the chat pod now. What stories do we predominantly in our, thinking about that dominant narrative, what stories do we tell about men and boys? And then maybe as a follow-up, how might this impact our engagement strategies and messaging? So if anybody would like to respond to the chat pod and just sort of talk a little bit about maybe stories that they see. Whoop. Okay, So there's the question. Oh. So I don't know,
someone
Maria.
mentioned the American dream.
Okay. Yeah, the American dream, right? And certainly there's constructs of masculinity built into that, right? It's we can talk. I think probably when a lot of folks maybe think of the American dream, it's built on status, power, wealth, success, things that we maybe associate with hegemonic masculinity. So yeah, and I'm just realizing, Maria, I cannot see the responses for some reason. So if you can read them off, that would be amazing.
Perfect, absolutely. So we have men and boys don't have feelings, stories of conquest, men don't cry. Someone mentioned, I like sharing a psychological research study that challenges the myth of internalizing emotions as a symbol of strength.
I love that.
Overly sexual.
Yep.
Someone said, I'm not seeing the responses either. They're under the questions box.
Okay.
So if folks could please type them into the chat box so that everybody could see them, that would be great.
Yeah, and we can just follow along, but in the sake of time, I'm going to move on because most of us are going to come up with these stories, right? And this is really, you know, addressing sort of the traditional, again, that dominant narrative of masculinity, right? Is these rules of masculinity in our culture, and this comes from work from Robert Brannon, sociologist who I think did this work in the late 70s, but basically he kind of identified that, you know, some of the pillars of masculinity here in American society, it was first, don't be a sissy, right? So it's about showing that you have strength, showing that you're strong, that you're dominant, right? And I think first and foremost, it's a rejection of anything feminine, right? And really, as men, we are supposed to dominate and control other men who are seen as less weak or as less manly, right? Or maybe weak. And certainly in the way that we work and navigate our relationships with women. The next one here then would be this idea of being a big shot, right? It's about having wealth and status and power and being, you know, man of the year, someone important, someone who is sort of controlling and leading the whole narrative forward. It's also being a rock, right? This is about that, like, internalizing the emotional piece, right? Like being very stoic, being very self-sufficient, not having to rely on anyone, maybe being a loner. And then being a badass, right? Like using violence, using your physical might and power, maybe even using weapons to solve conflicts and to assert your dominance. So this is not this is not news to most folks. A lot of times we might call this toxic masculinity. Ew, gross. It's all like toxic waste, right? Now, I would never use this term toxic masculinity, when I was doing prevention education. I would say never, right? But, you certainly don't want to market your program as like the toxic masculinity support group or something like that, right? I think that's a good way to sort of turn men and boys off. Oh, it looks like there's a delay on the PowerPoint I'm seeing. Okay, where are we at now? It's working now? Caught up? All right, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad the internet finally caught up with us. So, and I've often found, right, that most people's response to toxic masculinity is like, well, if we could just teach this kid not to be such a dick, right? And I hate to be explicit, and I don't mean to penis shame, right? Because those of you who work in sexual health realize that it's important, the words we use, but I think almost every one of us has thought this, right? Like we're struggling with a man or a young person, a boy who is displaying a lot of those elements of toxic masculinity, and we sort of throw up our hands and we're like, at the very least, just don't be a dick, right? Don't be a jerk, don't be mean, don't hurt people. And so this is really the question I pose, right? So how do we even know what healthy masculinity is? What does it look like? and really helping us to maybe make the shift away from, I think it's easy, and sometimes we do this too often, I think, in our field, that we focus on the negative, right? Where we can talk about all the things that's wrong with boys and men and all the unhealthy behaviors and all the things that we know, tie into perpetrating abuse and violence. But I think then, if we say, well, we can identify that this story is garbage, right? That this story hurts people, but then it's not so easy to figure out, well, then what do we replace that with? So again, I will turn to the chat pod. If anybody has any ideas just off the top of your head, right? How do we know what that looks like? And again, in the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving on, but as we see stuff come up, we certainly will address it. And then again, this idea of storytelling, why I think storytelling is so key to the work you do, whether you're just having very natural conversations with the boys and men in your life, or if you're working with a formal program, maybe you're using an evidence-based curriculum, certainly there is room for telling stories within this. And to me, stories are shortcuts to learning, right? So we've got our culture of toxic masculinity, we've got rape culture, problematic beliefs, right? We don't want to have to navigate that whole maze, right? Because we will get lost, we'll get overwhelmed, maybe we will get eaten by a minotaur or something. It's the storytelling that is that shortcut to transformation. And I'm going to show you a little bit how that works. So here's a video that we use in our gender stereotypes class, it's basically just me reading this short story book that was written in the early 70s. So I'm gonna run it for you, and then we will have a little chat about how we utilize this story within our prevention education.
I'm glad I'm a boy. I'm glad I'm a girl. Boys have trucks. Girls have dolls. Boys are Cub Scouts. Girls are brownies. Boys are strong. Girls are graceful. Boys are handsome. Girls are beautiful. Boys are doctors. Girls are nurses. Boys are policemen. Girls are meter maids. Boys are football players. Girls are cheerleaders. Boys are pilots. Girls are stewardesses. Boys are heroes. Girls are heroines. Boys are presidents. Girls are first ladies. Boys fix things. Girls need things fixed. Boys can eat. Girls can cook. Boys invent things. Girls use what boys invent. Boys build houses. Girls keep houses. Boys are grooms. Girls are brides. Boys are fathers. Girls are mothers. I'm glad you're a girl. I'm glad you're a boy. We need each other. I'm glad I'm a boy. I'm glad I'm a girl. By Whitney Darrow Jr.
Okay, so this conversation, when we show this in a typical middle school class, it almost starts a riot, and it's actually, as a facilitator, it's pretty fun because we are indeed trolling the kids, right? We start to see grimace faces, fists clenching, right? Audible gasps of just disgust with this story. And what I love about this story, right, is it's such an easy way for young people to identify that this story is bunk, that this story is garbage, right? And that this story is both limiting to women, but it's also limiting to boys and men. And then we often ask young people too, right, who's missing from this story? And often they're pretty savvy these days, right? And they will tell you maybe gender non-binary folks or someone who identifies as transgender. And a great opportunity to say, not only does the story provide harm to the people in the story, but when we leave people out of our stories, it becomes easier to excuse violence against them. And so the great thing about this is now we are all on the same page. We're all in alignment to this idea that, hey, we've all been socialized with this idea about gender, about masculinity and femininity and the roles we're supposed to play, but we can all identify how they're not working in our own lives, right? And so with that said, I also like to use this little cartoon, right? So it's got the knife and the fork, and they're talking to the chopsticks, and they say, so which one of you is the fork? And I think this is just sad, right? It's this idea that even if we have like a same-sex couple, right? So I have a good friend who is gay, and I remember one time being at a party and he introduced his boyfriend, and someone said, you know, which one of you is the guy? Which one of you is the wife, right? And so it's this idea, even when we're talking about like two men or two women, that we still default to this like dominant narrative that someone has to be the masculine one, someone has to be the one in charge, the alpha, right? There has to be an alpha and a beta. And really, I see that as one of the biggest obstacles we have to addressing all of, you know, any types of relational violence that we might experience. So, what do? Right? We tell stories that challenge the dominant narrative of masculinity. And one story I like to tell is a simple story about me in 7th grade. And I tell this to a lot of boys that I work with in the schools, especially one day back in 7th grade, 80s, it all started with a simple prank. Who sat behind me in English class, taped a kick me sign, believe it or not, right? A kick me sign to my back. And of course, everyone laughed and I was made out to be the fool, the chump, right? And of course, like, this angered me. I got upset. I didn't want to look like a dork in front of, you know, the rest of the class. Certainly not Becky Williams, who sat next to me, who I had a pretty big crush on, right? So what did I do? Oh, I issued a throwdown, right? I was like, dude, 3:30 on the bike rack, at the bike racks, it is on, right? And immediately after I said this, I really questioned where that came from, because I was then immediately terrified of the fact that I not only had to be in a fight, but I was the one that instigated the fight. Now, if you can imagine, and this is like straight out of like 80s movies, right? Is that all day, right? This was first hour. So people are getting wind of this. In the second, hey, did you hear what happened in first hour fight, right? Eric and Tyler are going to show down, right? And then everybody's sort of picking their sides in their camps, right? And so now it isn't just like an issue between me and this one kid. Like, literally the whole school is getting involved, to the point where it is like 6th hour, the end of the day, I am losing it, right? I'm having a panic attack that I have to be in this fight. I can't back down, because if I back down, if I am not at that bike rack at 3:30, like, I am going to be the biggest sucker at school, right? And this all ties into like our masculine stereotypes. So then I get confronted by Tom Lloyd, who is the biggest, baddest boy at school. He is leader of the warlords. The warlords wear jean jackets with cut off arms and leather gloves with the tips cut off, straight Billy Idol scenario, right? And he basically comes in and is like, dude, there's going to be this fight and I'm going to be out there. I'm going to officiate the rules. And if you win, we might have a place for you with the warlords. I don't want to be in the warlords, right? I am scared to death, right? I don't know what's going to happen. I honestly don't feel like I can win this fight, right? So what happens? We show up at 3:30, classic circle around the bike racks, right? There's me and my nemesis in the middle of the circle, everyone chanting, fight, 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 fight. And I don't know what to do, man. I'm sweating it. And so we kind of go nose to nose, right? And we're ready to kind of throw down. And he's stalling and I'm stalling. And I kind of get up real close in his face and I just say, dude, do you actually want to fight? And he's like, looks real mean. I don't know. Do you want to fight? Obviously, neither one of us wanted to fight, but no one had the guts to back down. And finally, I just said, I'm not doing this. And I was like, dude, do you like pizza rolls, right? And he was like, what? And he was like, my mom just got a box of pizza rolls, right? And I have Nintendo. Would you like to come to my house and eat pizza rolls and play Nintendo? And we walked off, right? And left everyone sitting there. No fight, right? Very anticlimactic, but me and this guy became best friends all through the rest of middle school. And it was all peace through pepperoni, right? A totally like bonkers, like just goofy story, but kids are like at the edge of their seat when I tell them this story, because they can't conceive, some of our fighter kids who are so indoctrinated into some of this toxic masculinity and the bravado, right? They can't imagine of ever walking away from a fight. And so when we normalize that there's other paths other than violence, right? And there's alternatives to how we sort of display and navigate our masculinity, right? That we can solve problems without violence and maybe even make a new friend, right? So with that said, also realizing that it isn't just storytelling, right? That it's media. Media is an amazing way to tell stories, a perfect thing to integrate into some of your prevention education outreach. because it is truly a shortcut. And media also provides sort of this bird's eye view, right? It's like you're above the maze here looking down, and you can see things more objectively, and hopefully that will lead to transformation. So with that said, I want to turn it over. And I'm going to skip this just in the sake of times. But I think this is a great example of how people use media to sort of challenge that dominant narrative of masculinity. So this came out a few years ago. You can Google it if you haven't seen it. I think a lot of folks have. It's called A Needed Response. It's by Samantha Stendhal, and it was really this young man basically sort of flips the script on what you should do when you encounter a drunk girl passed out at like a frat party, and basically says you should take care of her, right? You should be a caregiver. You shouldn't hurt people. So again, just a simple example of how media can be used to transform that narrative of masculinity. But with that said, Lori, come on in here. We're going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to hand it off to my good partner here, Lori. Lori has a background in communication, is also an amazing advocate, but is going to lead us through a little discussion of how we might utilize media very effectively within our program. So yes. I'm going to step out of the way here and hand it over to you.
Okay, cool. So we're going to dive right into media. Okay, so media surrounds us, right? So we're constantly consuming so many things, movies, television, music, the news, right? So how does media affect us? If you want to jump on the chat and let me know what you think, that would be amazing. But we'll just kind of move on through for right now. So psychosocial studies show that the way that we learn by observation, right? And we tend to imitate what we learn based on what is rewarded and what is punished. So socialized reality, meaning our own lived reality, and media reality, they reflect each other, right? So they feed into each other and they influence each other, and we kind of create this meaning together. I've been thinking a lot today about the Kavanaugh hearings that are happening. I don't know if you've been thinking about that. I'm sure you have, since you're involved in this kind of work, and about Dr. Ford's testimony and about how this is kind of like taking the focus of the world right now. This is media influencing our own reality, the work that we literally do, right? Because it's informing how we perceive consent, how people understand consent, how people perceive and understand assault, right? So just one tiny example of how powerful media can be. It's this pervasive, persuasive tool that is, again, constantly surrounding us and can have positive or negative impacts. And representation is, of course, everything. Today we're talking about men and masculinity. So we need to be mindful of how those things, those people, those ideas are portrayed in the media we're constantly surrounded by. One thing I thought was really powerful during the Women's March in 2016, there were so much amazing signage, right? So these are just a couple examples. So we see a whole bunch of references here that I'm sure that you recognize. We see superheroes, we see Star Wars, we see references to songs, cartoons, musicals, books, memes, so many different things, right? And people saw these examples of media and channeled them as part of how they wanted to use their own voice for this movement, right? So they saw reflected in these pieces of media their own cause, right? So they took to the streets, they held up these samples of media to be like, hey, this is what we're striving for. This is what we mean, this is what we want. So media doesn't just stay on the screen, right? It doesn't just stay on the page or in our phone. We use it in our own reality to help facilitate that understanding. In our work that we do this thing called the gender box activity. So what we do is we draw like this box, two boxes. One is for men, one is for women, and it's all about stereotypes. So in the man box, it's all about the peak stereotypical man, right? Super masculine. And then the lady box is about the most ladylike lady. Since we're talking about men today, we'll focus on the man box. So we get so many different answers. We're thinking stereotypically, right? So they'll be saying, okay, so manly men, so strong, aggressive, protector, provider, athlete, likes to drink beer, likes to have sex with all the ladies, so many different things they will put in this man box. And when we get to the end of this activity, we ask them, okay, so how did you know what things to list to put in these stereotypical boxes? Where did these things come from? And the number one answer consistently is it's a huge part of how we learn. It's a huge part of like how we notice the norms, right? Because media is super powerful. So we see representation. We see people who look like us or who don't look like us. We see repeated behaviors. first, which become how we perceive what is normal, what the ideal is, what these stereotypes are, and again, those rewarded and punished behaviors. I have some examples on here of some entertainment media, some news media. You can see examples of like what's seen as traditional, maybe the American family, if you look at King of Queens there. We also have on the opposite end of the screen, Fresh Off the Boat, which is not an uncommon experience. We have Chinese Americans, right, represented there, which is a really powerful thing and a pretty big deal because that's not a common family that we see on screen. There's so many things we could talk about here. With 12 Years a Slave, when you think about how Black people, African Americans, are often represented in media, a big part of their story that is told is the story of slavery, which is a giant part, but it's of course not the only piece or the only story that we can tell, right? And when you see yourself reflected in only this single story, that's really powerful. That's impactful about how we perceive ourselves and how we matter to the rest of the world. So how can we use media for prevention education? Practicing media literacy is basically just being critical of the media that we're consuming and the media that we're using. So these are some key questions. We want to know who created this message because all messages are created. So we want to know who is crafting these things, what techniques are being used to attract my attention, what's making me want to watch this. How might different people understand this message differently from me? Because we're all consuming the same thing, right? In this idea, but we're all coming to it with different experiences in our own personal lives that color our paradigm and how we perceive the world, right? What things are being pushed in this media? What values, what lifestyles, what is being represented, what's being omitted, and why does this message exist? What is the point? This was created with intention. What is that intention? Some core concepts of media literacy. Again, all media messages are constructed. They don't come out of nowhere. Groups of people or a single person figures out what they want to communicate and how. And typically, media is produced for profit or for power. So who is making money off of this? Who's trying to gain power off of this? Who are they trying to keep out of power? These are questions we want to know. And again, different people experience the same media message differently.
So I just want to make you aware. It looks like we've got about a 30-second delay from when you're activating the slide to when it comes out. So
yes.
Just so you're aware and other folks are.
Which I know.
Yep.
Thank
okay.
you.
Good.
Yes,
yeah.
thank you. Okay, so awareness of how we consume is just the first step of all of this, right? To be effective at what we do, to be effective advocates for change, we have to really be mindful of who is being left out of the narrative of everything that we're using. So we'll zoom in a little bit. This is from Spy Kids. You'll see him again in just a second. But we're zooming in on what Tyler was talking about earlier, which is rape culture. So a quick little definition, so I'm sure you're all familiar, is an environment in which sexual violence is normalized and excused in popular culture, right? And so if we think about this in terms of a pyramid, we all know how pyramids work. You have to have the very big part on the bottom for the tiny part at the top to exist. So here at the bottom, we see things like biases, right? Ideas like boys will be boys, things you're probably hearing in regards to this actual hearing that's happening today, the Kavanaugh hearing, right? Boys will be boys, rape jokes, sexist attitudes, and these things lead to stronger acts of violence all the way up to that very top point of murder and rape, right? Goes from normalization to degradation to violence. And so how do these things happen? These are based on these myths and these stereotypes and these strict gender roles that we see all the time in media. If you think of so many movies, so many television shows, the press, right? How people are even talking about Dr. Ford today, calling her attractive, right? And pleasing to look at. These all contribute to this violence. And they teach us what to expect and how to respond when we don't get what we expect. For example, maybe you can think of a story that you've seen in a movie or a television show where there's this guy and he's like got up this courage to ask this girl out that he's been like trying to like get together with, and she turns him down. How might he respond? Might it be violent? Maybe yes. Does that happen in real life? It super does, and that's something that we all know, right? So this stuff is learned. Again, we're zooming in with the Spy Kids. So we're going to talk about lenses of representation, because that's really what we're here to talk about today. So when we're using media in our work, we need to be super mindful of using media that represents people as people, because in order to prevent violence against people, we have to really humanize who we're talking about, right? And we're focusing on men and masculinity today. So when we're looking at media, we really need to consider how men and masculinity are portrayed. So these are some helpful questions to consider when you're looking at a piece of media. When you're looking at a character like a dude, right? Is this character a stereotype? We'll go through some stereotypes in just a little bit. But is this character fitting inside of that man box that we were talking about earlier? I'll go through all of these. I'll list all those since there's a little bit of a lag. What groups does this character represent? Is this character a cis white dude? Is this character representing a person of color? Are they representing somebody of a different socioeconomic status? Are they from a different country? Are they able-bodied? Are they not quite? Like, where are they at? Who are they representing? Are we only seeing the same character over and over again? How does this character relate to the other people in the story? How do they relate to men? Who are the targets of violence? Who are the targets of like ridicule? How do they relate to women? Are they treated with respect? Are they treated like equals? Or are they treated like objects? To children, do children matter to this character? Do their thoughts and feelings impact the character in any way? Are there people of other identities in this story? How does this character interact with them? Are they treated with respect like they're equals? What qualities of this character seem glorified and what qualities seem shamed? When we think of most stories, there's typically a hero and a villain in some kind of capacity. Who is the hero? What makes them a hero? Who's the villain? What makes them a villain? Who's being celebrated and who's being pushed down, right? And how do these qualities that we're talking about here, how do they normalize and stigmatize violence? Because most media has some kind of an impact on how violence works in the real world. So what is happening in this particular example? So these are some stereotypes, some characteristics we can think of. We got like the manly man kind of stuff there on the left, and the non-traditional characteristics on the right. So we've got for the non-traditional, a guy who is sensitive to feelings, works with others, accepts help, cares for children, has non-sexual friendships with women. How many characters can you think of that are men that represent those characteristics? Not many, so we want to zoom in on those. A really great example of this is Black Panther. He's got elements of both if we're talking about T'Challa, who's the character in the center there. And I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, it's on Netflix, highly recommend. But what's beautiful about Black Panther is you're representing people of color, Black people specifically, and also just the way that he interacts with the women in the story is amazing. Everyone is treated as an expert in their field. He seeks out their help. Right? He does not have sexual relationships with like any of them. He has kind of a crush on one of them, but it's so super minor that it's not really a big part of the story. So these are things that we can keep in mind when we search for media to use in our work. And it's just important to be critical, right? And to be mindful of what we're choosing because the impact of media is very long and powerful. And basically, if you want to take anything away from this story, is basically that we cannot be what we cannot see, right? If we do not see ourselves represented on screen, we feel limited, kind of like with that book that Tyler was talking about earlier. If we can't see it as a possibility, it's hard for us to achieve that possibility. So that is me. Switch it over to somebody else.
Yeah,
Sit still for a second,
okay.
Lois. I'm going to slide in next to you, and
Okay.
and I apologize. It looks like we did have a little bit of technical delay there, and hopefully you were able to see all the slides that Lori presented. If not, you're going to get the handout. Lots of information in a short time. I just want to make sure, give opportunity for anyone to ask Lori any questions because she is highly skilled at media literacy and just able to infuse a lot of this work into the work that we do with boys and young men in the schools. Mm-hmm. So with that said, please ask more questions now. I think maybe we'll just show up in the chat. Yeah.
How do we know what healthy masculinity is? What does it look like? Let us know if you have questions and we'll read them out.
I think that may have been cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maria, are you still there? Can you hear us? Everything going fine technically on your end?
Yeah, the only thing is folks are typing into the questions box and it's only visible to us. So if you all have any questions, type them in and we will read them out for you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Do you have any that you would like to read out now?
There aren't any that have come in, but if you all wanted to hear, there was some feedback from the question about what healthy masculinity looks like. So as people are typing in their questions, one of them is healthy masculinities is a process, not a product. Another one was men who are accountable to their actions. They don't get stuck in gender norms, and they hold other men and boys accountable for their actions.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave us a Native American perspective, that it's someone who is tied to traditions and someone who is respectful to all community members. Many have responsibilities within families that allow them to grow up with that sense of importance just as women, and there is a sense of balance. They mentioned there's a harder to come by in Native communities with the introductions to drugs and alcohol. A question did come in with gender boxes. How do you enter into the conversation about sexuality and race impacting the boxes, which are white masculinity and femininity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So typically we don't dive into race too super hard for that particular activity, though we discuss it kind of throughout, because we always try to approach our work with an intersectional lens. So we do know that there are different relationships in regard to strict ideas of gender roles based on race, based on culture, based on so many things. But in the activity, we don't really dive in it too much.
Yeah, like I said, we do try to provide an intersectional lens, but oftentimes when we're giving that presentation, we are there explicitly to talk about gender-based violence. And as you imagine, we have 50 minutes, to sort of go off on kind of a splinter topic, right? Sometimes we just don't have the time, but certainly, like, I can remember being facilitating this, and when we said act like a lady, one young woman said, well, are we talking about black ladies or white ladies, right? And so often, like, when those questions come up, especially like if I'm working in a school where maybe I don't look like the folks, right? Whether I'm a different race, a different gender, a different age, a different background, I always just sort of defer to their expertise. Like, okay, so you posed the question, do you think it matters? And obviously this kid will, yeah, of course it does, right? So the narrative is going to be different based on different cultures, right? Okay, well, let's talk about your school culture, right? Because maybe that's what matters now. Let's talk about, like, your neighborhood. So maybe, like, first kind of talking about, I think, those of us that know about the social ecological model, right? It's this idea of, like, focusing in maybe on some of those like tighter spheres, right? About the community-based stuff and the relational stuff and the stuff that kids are interacting with immediately. I think we have to acknowledge that we live in a sexist, racist, society, right? And kids certainly are clued into that, right? And helping them validate that, right? I think a lot of times just validating what they're experiencing and helping them have healthy conversations to sort of unpackage that stuff. Oh, hey, I see it's Angela. Hey, Angela.
It is my experience that there is not enough time, but you can give an overview, right? Reflected back.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, I don't think we ever want to leave anything undressed. I always say, if we go 10 minutes off on sort of some rabbit hole, right? But it's real and it's honest, and that's the question that's posed, and it's an issue that, like, whoever your audience is currently facing. I would much rather not get to all of the content in the slideshow if we're having a right here, right now, this is what's really impacting your life, right? To provide just facilitate the discussion around that. So good call. Any other questions before we move on?
I think there was one thing about traditional qualities that maybe was kind of getting at. There's some good things about traditional qualities as well, which is another thing we like to emphasize in our box activity, like being a provider. That's a cool thing. Being strong, that's awesome. And when we talk about ladies, like being nurturing, that's amazing. Like the boxes themselves are the problem, not necessarily all of the elements inside of the boxes, in case that was a question.
Yeah. Angela responded hi to you. Hi, Angela. Yeah, glad you were here. And I was also this idea, right, that there isn't one, even when we're talking about healthy masculinity, right, there is no one right answer. I think most folks who do work around masculinity, like, refer to it in the plural, right, masculinities. And there's so many different ways, and so many of those ways are tied to different cultures about what does embody healthy masculinity, right? And I think it maybe is our job to find that common ground, right? And we hopefully, whatever your definition is, it includes being respectful and choosing a path of nonviolence and not wanting to hurt other people.
Yeah,
right?
it's like that harm reduction,
Yep.
which is everything that we are here to do.
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to move on because we've got just about half an hour left, and I've got more folks for you all to meet. Let's see here. What will be the best use of our time? Where do I want to jump ahead to? So, Andrew, I feel like you're down. You're like, put me in, coach, right?
Go get it.
Yeah? Okay. I want you guys to meet a good buddy of mine here. So let's see where it is now time for our fireside chat with Andrew Dettle.
Hello.
So Andrew, get in here on camera. So we
Am I
have to
on?
back up a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So this,
feel like I'm on Larry King right now.
yeah, this is great. This is the big time, Andrew. All right. So one, I want you to meet Andrew because he's been on staff with us for a year here as an advocate, educator. Comes with a great background as a social worker. But also, I want to give him a little bit of screen time because he sadly will be leaving us. So our loss, but Colorado, your gain.
Just a coincidence too.
Yeah.
Just per coincidence.
Yeah. There's no conspiracy theories here. Andrew, why don't you tell him where you're headed?
Yeah, I'm heading to Aurora, Colorado to be a school social worker. So of course, you all know that Colorado better than I do. I've actually never been, so I'm kind of making the leap to be a school social worker right outside of Denver, Colorado, and I just found out the schools that I'll be working at, which will be 2 elementary and middle schools as well. So
Awesome. Yeah. So we're going to enjoy our time with Andrew here, but I really wanted to engage Andrew in this discussion, right?
Yeah.
So my first question here, Andrew, is that, like I said, you came from this solid background of being a social worker.
Yeah.
You were managing a homeless youth shelter down in Madison, Wisconsin, and had done a lot of work around, not only homeless youth, but certainly youth were impacted by maybe some sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. So definitely came with your own amazing skill set. But coming into an agency like Cornerstone, that is like a DVSA agency that really addresses the issue through this gender violence, right? Gendered lens, right? That was all kind of new to you, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of your initiation into gender-based work.
yeah. So again, as Tyler mentioned, I have a degree in social work at Eau Claire and also at Madison. But a lot of the classes that I took at Eau Claire and Madison were not gender specific, so it didn't look at it through a gender specific lens. It was more so substance abuse and mental health and child abuse. And not to say those things are not related to toxic masculinity, it was just not gender specific. So again, we didn't have a lot of those conversations through that lens. It was more so just kind of awareness and how to be a good social worker and be a good advocate, and just preparing yourself working with specific groups of people, right? So again, we never looked at it through that gender lens, and of course, toxic masculinity affects me and it affects a lot of men and a lot of younger men as well. In a lot of my work with those younger men, I've never really conceptualized like, hey, you're struggling with this because maybe how you're raised, or maybe some of those are your societal expectations or things that were just kind of placed on you at a younger age too. So my work with younger men before coming here, we never were looking at like maybe some of the deeper issues that they were struggling with. And I think coming to Cornerstone really allowed me to like, hey, let's look at let's dive deeper in these issues. Like maybe you're acting this way because of this, or how you're raised, or these media messages, or just being a younger man struggling with all the different things that men often struggle with. And I can relate to that through their experiences as well.
Awesome. So yeah, I know when you came here. So our next question, right? Like I know when you came here, we were fortunate enough that those of you who are familiar with Tony Porter and A Call to Men, they were holding their annual conference, like literally just 3 blocks from our office, and we were able to, Andrew and I were able to go over there. And I know you were just like eating all of this stuff up, right? You were reading all the books, watching all the movies, and I would just wonder, after doing this for a year, what advice would you have for newbies, right? So somebody, and specifically like someone like male staff who's getting involved in this work for the first time.
Yeah, and I just want to mention to the first question, like again, toxic masculinity is something that has affected me in my relationships, but before I came to Cornerstone, it was something I wasn't consciously thinking about, right? It was just in the back of my mind, like, hey, that actually, because I was raised or because of the message I've been taught, is how this impacted this relationship or this relationship too. So of course, doing as much research as you can on toxic masculinity, and also connect it to your personal life, I think can be valuable in your work with other people, as long as it's not getting in the way, right? You're using it in an effective way. As far as advice to newbies, I think learning how to be yourself, presenting the material in a way that feels comfortable to you. I do a lot of groups, as Tyler mentioned, with younger men, right? So I find my own kind of ways in which I present material that might not work for other people, and they might present in different ways that might work for me, right? And also as a straight white male, right? If I'm working with a group of kids that come from different backgrounds, right? Like I know that I cannot specifically get a message across that like maybe some media might be able to get across, right? As Lori mentioned, or also telling stories that like, hey, I'm 27, but I'm still struggling with like this toxic masculinity, like sharing my feelings and telling my friends I love them, right? Or just like being a really supportive male friend to all, regardless of the gender, right? So again, I think relying on storytelling and sharing that you're not an expert all the time and you're still struggling with this idea of toxic masculinity, right? Is powerful, but also using media in a way that you can kind of just share it, that you're like, okay, I cannot articulate the message I'm trying to get across, but I know this person can, or this documentary can. I know I rely a lot on the documentary The Mask You Live In, right? So it's a documentary on Netflix, and it kind of just shows how boys are raised into men, and again, all these expectations of what it means to be a quote-unquote man. So I rely on that a lot, and it seems like there's a lot of responses from the kids because they relate. They hear like someone their age sharing, hey, I'm struggling with this because my dad's not around, or I'm struggling with this because of so and so. So I rely on a lot of documentaries, but also just more representation of their own background that they come from.
Yeah, you know, a couple things as you were talking, you were talking about, hey, you're 27 and you're still studying this stuff. So I'm 45, right?
Yeah,
I'm still trying to figure it out, right? And I think this goes back to like, yeah, it is a journey. And I think one of our participants said that, right? It's a process, right? It isn't this thing that like, hey, I figured that out last week, like I'm good, right? It's something that even those of us in the field like consciously and constantly have to be mindful of, and continually figuring out how we can grow and be better. Right?
And I'll share stories about like, hey, me and my friend did this, right? Like, of course, appropriate disclosure, right? Like I still like I still struggle with telling my friend I love them, or like be nurturing to them, or right? Because again, this is a journey, as Tyler mentioned, and you're never ending it, right? You're constantly trying to become a better person and a better ally, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I love that idea too. I think one thing that we can do as men in the field, right, is really model that vulnerability ourselves, right? It sort of normalizes it. Like if I'm in the room and I hear Andrew talk about a story about where he broke down and cried, or about how he was having a rough time, or how he didn't have it all figured out, right? Like things that show that there's a little dent in that traditional masculine armor, right? It makes it more likely that I'm going to share, right? Like, hey, Andrew did it. Andrew had the courage. It was safe, like, right? Nobody put him on blast, so maybe I can share a little bit too. And when I share, then that opens up the door for others. And now it's just normal, right? That's not something. It's not even a barrier, because at least within our small group or our small, our class or whatever, that we've created this safe space for boys or men to become authentic. Right?
And I think I have of course I can share, and it can connect with someone in the group, but I know when peers share within amongst each other, it can be really effective, right? So one group I was running, one of the peer boys, where he shared that his dad was not in his life, right? So he lived with a single parent, right? So we started talking, and I asked the entire group, who here lives with one parent, and they all raised their hand, right? And it seemed like all the looks around like the room were like, I didn't know that about you, right? Like this is something we never talked about. And then the only one that did not raise his hand actually
Hello, everyone. It seems like our video playback is having problems. Thank you for sticking with us while we try to figure this out. Hopefully we can continue here in the next couple seconds or so. Tyler, can you hear us? So we'll just give it a little bit and hopefully the video can come back.
Participants if they can hear you.
Can you all raise your hands if you can hear me? Yep, it looks like, thank you, Carl, Angela, Carly. So it looks like you all can hear me. Can you all, I'm gonna put your hands down. Can you all hear Tyler, or is that something that's on our end? Raise your hand if you can hear Tyler. Yeah, okay, it's frozen. Give us a second to try to figure this out. Thank you all, I see your messages, it's frozen. That's frozen for everyone.
Here, screen?
There you go.
Yeah, a little healthier.
Oh,
Oh, no.
Tyler, hello?
Hi, it says connection.
Hi.
So, yeah.
All right, so you all were frozen with us for a second. If you
Okay.
all will go back to answering the question that you just put up,
There
how
you
has
go.
this work impacted your personal life?
Yeah. Did you all just miss our great romance?
We
Yeah.
did, unfortunately, we did. You might
Okay,
have
yeah,
to
we will.
recreate it for us.
Okay, so it's just literally this last question,
Yeah,
right?
and I'll be
Okay.
quick.
Yeah. Okay.
So
take
it's-
two.
Take two. So it's just allowed me. I don't have everything figured out, but it just allows me to be more conscious of how toxic masculinity affects my life, right? But it also just being able to be more of a supportive friend or coworker, right? And just being able to like share with your friend, hey, you can be sad, or you can share that with me, right? I'm a safe person to talk to, so on and so forth, and being open to that. As far as the toxic masculinity stuff, I think I'm more likely to call like stuff out that maybe more that to me reinforce like these gender expectations and norms, right? So if it's a buddy that says something that's just ridiculous or offensive, right, just call it out, like, hey, that is like putting potential people in uncomfortable situations, right? So hold on, sorry, that's Diamond and do. As far as your future work, I think I'm going to take this and run with it, because I think toxic masculinity is the closest experience that I can relate to, right? Because growing up as a guy, right, we all have these expectations, and I can totally relate to that. And I think with my school social work position, I'd like to continue to do groups and run with that. And all thanks to you, Tyler, and Cornerstone. I think, again, I kind of figured out my passion and how it relates.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to miss him. So, like I said, our loss, your gain, Colorado, in the immortal words of Horace Greeley, go west, young man, go west.
And I'm all for networking. So again, if I think the email was in the beginning of the PowerPoint, at the end of the PowerPoint. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm all for networking and learning about everybody on this webinar. And those who are close to Aurora or Denver, that'd be wonderful, because I don't have many friends out there, and I'm looking for friends and coworkers or networking opportunities as well. So.
Yeah, so before we move into the last bit here, is there any questions that anyone has for Andrew? You're welcome to.
Someone asked what happened to the kid that didn't raise his hand. We are very curious.
Let me recheck my story. So the person who did not raise their hand was the person, of course, he was living with two parents, but he shared that his parents were recently getting a divorce, right? So that was going to be, he would have became a person that would have raised their hand, because he was going to be living with a single parent. But the point of the story was none of the friends in the group knew that this divorce was going on, and it happened, it was going on for like 2-3 weeks, right? So these were close friends, and none of them knew this about each other, which kind of reinforces this like toxic masculinity idea that you have to like hold in your feelings, and you can't talk about what's going on in your life. And of course, it can be very damaging, right? So again, these close group of friends didn't know some of the more personal things about this student or this teenager too. So yeah, does that answer it? I think that's.
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to pose a quick question here. So moving on. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And Andrew's contact information, we'll share it at the end here. So quick question. Let me just check to make sure question to the group. Can women and non-male identified staff effectively facilitate a boys or men's group? So if you would just type a quick yes or no, or maybe it depends in the chat pod, that would be awesome. The reason why I posed this question, right, is believe it or not, when I was doing work back there in Colorado, there was a pretty heated discussion that I was involved in about this idea that only men should be facilitating fatherhood programs, that it takes a man to sort of teach a man. And I can certainly share with you once you've shared your opinions on this about how that conversation ended, but I don't want to give away any spoilers. So if you could share your thoughts on this idea real quickly, I would appreciate it.
We just have a few here. We have one that said, yes, but it would affect the dynamic. It can impact the dynamic. It would be very challenging to effectively lead it. One person says no. One person says anyone can, but positive role modeling is always more effective. Someone else says yes, for sure, especially if we're talking about masculinity, which affects all genders. And I think some are still coming in, but that's what we have so far.
Okay, great. Yeah, and that's a good sampling. And so just to kind of finish the story about the discussion within the fatherhood work, it was as a group of leaders, right? The Colorado Fatherhood Coordinating Council, like, we came out with a position that said, yes, absolutely, right? Like, women can be very effective teachers within a fatherhood program. You know, this is something that we welcome facilitators and leaders of all genders, right? And certainly I think there is something to be said, right? I know, especially with the young guys that we work with, they do, you know, they like to see that older, you know, male role model, right? That positive male role model, right? It was kind of goes back to what Lori was saying, like, you can't, what's the quote? You can't be, you cannot see, right? And sometimes it helps to have that, like, representation, right? But it doesn't mean that there isn't a place for everyone in this work. And I can honestly say I have probably learned the most in this field through just some amazing women who took me under their wing early on and nurtured me. And then, you know, with all types of people, I'm always learning, right? People are always adding to that story. So with that said, I just want to provide, I do realize that sometimes some folks maybe feel like, hey, like, I'm not a guy. Why would these like middle school boys want to hang out with me, or what do I have to offer? So without further ado, Liz Maloney. Liz is another one of our great staff, and so she's coming on board here, so grab a seat. I'm going to turn it over to you, but we are now going to present, here we go, Liz's The Gal's Guide to Working with Boys or with Men and Boys. So take it away, Liz.
Yeah, so I get to work with all of the genders of students, but I really enjoy working with my little middle school dudes and my high school young men. But it's not like the same. And this is just my experience. Maybe it's different with other people, and these aren't like the rules to live by or anything. But some hints or just realizations I've had working like one-on-one advocacy with little dudes is just expecting it's going to take a little longer to warm up with them to start talking. So it's really important to just give them that time. And I think in that time, building that rapport, and maybe that's just by asking them, like, yo, what is your favorite, like what do you like to do? Is it video games? Is it like the sports are your thing? Or is it like a TV show, or like the newest internet challenge? And like, not just like little dudes, but like any kid loves to, if you don't know something, to tell you all about it, so they get to be the expert. So building that relationship is really important. And you learn things, so it's great. And often just realizing your talks are often going to be shorter. Like, that's just how it's going to be. That's fine. That's what they're comfortable with. But maybe like ways to get them to talk more is just asking more questions and having a lot of those follow-up questions. Open-ended, not like, oh, do you have a good or bad relationship with your mom? Asking like, no, like, how is your relationship? Like, give me an example. So those follow-up questions, and then just challenging them if they like bring up just something that happens often. Well, why? Why does that happen? Or why is that okay in your friend group? And making them like have the gears start twirling. Be like, oh yeah, that is kind of weird. I never thought about that. That's just maybe like how I thought I am supposed to act around these certain people. Right, and I think just maybe you're not a dude, but I think often we meet with young boys because like they get in a fight or they get in trouble, and oftentimes they have the interactions with like the disciplinary people, right, who always are just yelling at them and they're kind of short. So if you build that relationship where they have the time to talk and explain the situation, of course they are going to want to tell you. But creating realistic expectations, like calling them out, is totally fine, but maybe giving them like a little challenge. Like, all I ask is you try it for this week, then tell me how it is. So just challenging them, but making it like realistic, like they can achieve it and they don't feel put on blast. And just letting them know that they are in control, because right, in the media they see all the manly men and think like, oh, I'm just so angry and I can't control it, I have to let it out, or like, I like deserve this or that, or like deserve to treat ladies this way. But they are in control and they like control what comes out of their mouth and their actions. So a lot of times it's easier to blame others, but they have the control.
So yeah, about like normalizing that they need to take responsibility for the behavior, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Liz. We've got just about 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna just dive into some just little last bits here, and then I'll open it up for question. But last but not least, I want to share, right? So in my years of doing this work, this is my basic toolkit for working with men and boys, and just some strategies that I found pretty effective. So the first one, we've already kind of mentioned this, right? Find common ground, right? I think those of us that do this work, we might be familiar with the idea of like othering folks, right? Whether it's othering people based on gender or race or socioeconomics, right? But what is our common ground? There's so many times in this work I've walked into the room and felt like the odd duck, right? The odd person out. Maybe it was like, hey, this isn't my crew, right? But my job is to find that, like, what do we all have in common, right? And for most folks, right, regardless of religion or background or politics, right, I would say most folks want to live in a safe community. Most folks want their loved ones to be healthy and happy, right? And so maybe if that's where we have as a starting place, then that's where we begin, right? Be an edutainer. Right? And so this is literally me in a hot dog suit on a military base at a chapel running a game called Do You Want to Touch My Wiener with a bunch of infantrymen. And so I say this, make learning fun, right? And so in this particular case, my buddy and I, good friend, Jeff Buchholz, who runs the organization We End Violence, we were out there doing some work. And these were like young men who were gunners, right? Had just come back from Afghanistan. These were the dudes who like run into the gunfire, right? So kind of like as hegemonic, warrior culture as you can get. And we were able to talk for 2 days about sexual violence prevention by just having fun. We did an anti-rape rap battle, and it was one of these things. Oftentimes in the military, folks are voluntold to go to a training. They might say 30% of your command has to check in at this training, and they kind of, the lower ranking folks are kind of told that they need to be there. After about our third presentation, we were using a lot of games, a lot of performance art, just having a good time, right? And challenging some of those dominant narratives, right? People were actually self-selecting. People were like, dude, this is different. This isn't your normal sexual assault brief. Like, you actually want to be there. This is better than going to work. It's fun. You're going to learn something, and you're going to get a lot of support. So be an edutainer, have fun. Also, we want to develop relationships, right? So like do that high five with folks, and really, really, like folks throughout our time here today have just mentioned, right? We have to develop rapport. We have, if we're not connected to the folks we're working with, we're not going to be as effective. Also there, we've got Tim Tebow, right? I don't know anything about sports. I know that at some time he played for the Denver Broncos. I'm feeling like he probably doesn't, but I do remember this story about like when he cried like on the sidelines because they lost a game, right? And it's just sort of this idea of someone that we think as a star athlete, like just being vulnerable on national television, right? And so Andrew and I kind of got into a little bit, right? And believe it or not, like straight cisgendered white dudes also need their safe spaces, right? We need spaces to to be able to unpackage all of this toxic masculine programming in a way where we don't feel put on blast, right? I've just found time and time again, a lot of men will not open up, will not get real unless they know that there's very minimal risk to doing so, right? And if we can't get them to be real, we really can't work with them. That's really, we got to make that in. Reframing nurturing is a form of strength. I think I heard somebody say this early on, but a lot of times I think we're taught to think that nurturing and caregiving are feminine things, right? And really, like, if you are a parent, if you've ever taken care of someone, right? If you've ever like grown a plant or a flower or whatever, you realize that like having the capacity to care about things and help things grow and flourish and thrive, that's freaking badass, right? Like, and so we have to celebrate nurturing as a sign of strength for all people, right? All right.
Just a good old boy, never meaning no harm.
Ways. Sorry, I just think a webinar should have more singing. Anyway, this is the Duke Boys, right? We actually, this work is subversive, right? We need to infiltrate the good old boys club, right? And sort of co-opt the good old boys club. Sometimes it does take men to do that, right? So we know that men maybe have access to other groups of men or men's spaces that other folks might have. And so we need good men in the field to come in and on behalf of everyone involved, right? Like facilitate that change from the inside, right? So if you see here, oh, it didn't change. Shoot. So we are also having network connections again. Oh, it changed? Okay, it didn't change on mine, so that's good. Oh, I was like, yes. So the joke doesn't work if it doesn't change. So, okay, good. I love jokes, right? Use jokes, have fun. So, is the call to action? Okay, right. So it's linearing on my end. Yeah, so after you engage these guys, like, what do you want them to do, right? What's the takeaway? Where do we go from here, right? And there's a ton of work to do. But Liz, cue the streamers. Oh boy. Last but not least, yes. Last but not least, we want to transform the culture, right? We want to ride off into the sun. We want to have that happy ending. And we want to have fun. We want to celebrate the work with our coworkers. We want to practice good self-care. But we want to, I think sometimes as advocates, we see the worst of the worst. And we need to take the time to get silly, right? And to ride off into that sun, right? To celebrate our happy endings. I know the work will never be done, right? As we've said, it's a process, but it is so important that we take that time to celebrate and enjoy each other. So with that said, I'm going to jump ahead here. We have just about 5 minutes. I just want to share, this is our contact information. Is that coming up okay? Okay, great. So this is, if you want to find out more about the great work that's being done here in fabulous Bloomington, Minnesota, this is cornerstonemn.org. You can find out about all of our programs. There's a link to our program, school-based services. This will all be in the handout. There's all of the email for everyone that's been on camera here today. Thanks to the SBS team. You guys are great. Best team I have ever worked with, so thank you for your work here today. Last but not least, I do provide technical assistance in different capacities, especially around media and some of this edutainment stuff. So certainly check me out online, like and subscribe and all that jazz, right? Transformativelearningsolutions.com is where you can find me. So Maria, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Any kind of last minute housekeeping or questions remaining?
It doesn't look like any questions are coming in. Folks said thank you, Tyler and company. We also here at CICASA want to thank you all, Tyler, Lori, Liz, Andrew, for taking the time to do this for us. We want to thank you all for bearing, or everyone really, for bearing with us with the technical difficulties. And we want to remind you to keep an eye out for our next webinar. It's called Planning for Language Access, Expanding Services to All Victims, and it will be done by National Technical Assistance Providers. That will be on Wednesday, October 17th from 11 to 12:30. So again, keep an eye out for that. And any questions that you may have, please do direct those towards Tyler or any of the other folks who were on screen today. You all can certainly email us and let us know any questions that you might have. And keep an eye out also for an email with that PDF of the PowerPoint and the materials. And don't forget to fill out that survey at the end when you leave the webinar today. So thanks again for everyone that presented, everyone was here. Thanks so much, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We all had a great time, and just thanks again.
Yeah, thank you all. See you all soon. And one.